right, welcome to a 9:15 a.m. news conference. Everybody ready? During my 8th State of the Commonwealth address early this year, I declared that Kentucky was back with a vengeance. And to back up that statement, I cited both an array of figures showing record growth in Kentucky's economy and a list of honors showing our new status as a national leader on the pressing issues of our time. Today, I want to share with the people of Kentucky new evidence that shows, if anything, that my statement was a little too reserved back in January. Kentucky's not only back with a vengeance, our momentum is accelerating rapidly. Critics of this state keep running their mouths about how bad things are, about how government can't be counted on to spend and save wisely, about how our businesses aren't creating jobs, and about how our schools don't know how to educate our children. Don't believe them, because they're wrong and the facts belie their political posturing. Kentuckians should feel good about the direction we're traveling. Let me explain why. I'll begin by making an announcement related to our budget, because this action is a clear, bold, and direct statement for all to see. Today, we are making an $82.5 million deposit into the state's Budget Reserve Trust Fund. That brings the so-called rainy day funds balance to $209.4 million, the highest in almost a decade. How are we able to do this? Because revenues in the fiscal year that just ended June 30 came in at $165.4 million higher than predicted. We grew our revenues, not by raising taxes. We grew them in the old-fashioned way. We earned it. We earned it by growing our economy. In fact, it appears that our economic recovery was even stronger than forecasters thought when this two-year budget was written. At the same time, over on the expense side, we've been very vigilant about our spending. In fact, here's an interesting pair of numbers for you. Since fiscal year 2008, general fund revenues in Kentucky have increased by 15%. Meanwhile, during the same period, expenditures increased only 7.6%, less than half as much. Folks, that is strong financial management. Just like families across the state have been doing, we have been watching where our dollars have gone. Now, this budget is one visible sign of growth in our economy. But here are some other signs. In the area of unemployment, during the depths of the recession, our unemployment rate hit 10.7%. Right now, our unemployment rate is 5.1%, lower than the national average for the 11th straight month. That is the lowest rate in Kentucky in 14 years. Jobs. Our seasonally adjusted non-farm employment increased by 2,200 jobs in June from the month before. Since June of 2014, we've added over 40,000 positions. The last time we had such sustained job growth at this level was in 1999. That's not opinion. That's what federal labor statistics say. Business investment. Last year, Kentucky announced more than 350 new industry location and expansion projects worth $3.7 billion. That is the most business investment in a single year since the state started keeping track of those figures about 30 years ago. And it's the highest in the nation on a per capita basis. That's why Kentucky recently won a big silver trophy called the Governor's Cup, awarded by a business group called Site Selection Magazine. Yes, it's true. In business development, Kentucky won the national championship. International investment. Awards like these that I just mentioned burnish Kentucky's reputation as a good place to do business, so much so that investors are pouring in from across the oceans. In the past 2 years, 35% of new investment and 27% of new jobs in Kentucky were created by companies based in places like China, India, Japan, Germany, France, and Canada. Of the almost 400,000 full-time manufacturing, service, and technology jobs in Kentucky, more than 1 in 5 come from foreign-owned businesses. These are big-time international companies, and they know a good business atmosphere when they see one. Exports. Not surprisingly, our growing international presence has helped Kentucky companies market their products outside of this country. And so we have shattered export records for 4 years in a row. Our road fund. Another reason that our economy is growing is because we've been aggressive about investing in our infrastructure. In the last 7 years, we've awarded $7.5 billion in highway contracts, and we can expect about $600 million more by the end of this year. Major projects include the Mountain Parkway, Interstate 69, the Ohio River Bridges Project, widening of I-65 and I-64, and after many years of waiting, modern new bridges over Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake. And that doesn't count the hundreds of smaller road projects all around this state. These road projects not only create immediate construction jobs, but also improve the local infrastructure landscape to encourage further development. Now, I could go on, but we're not here to spike the football in the end zone, or to cut down the nets, or to declare mission accomplished, because we've got a lot left to do. Not every Kentuckian who wants and needs a job has one, and some communities in this state are not seeing the kind of growth that other communities are seeing. In addition, here in Frankfort, we still face some long-term budgetary challenges, including creating a more modern tax system, finding money to increase investments in education, and ensuring a long-term reliability of our public pension systems. So we must continue our aggressive work to strengthen our economy, to build a stronger workforce, to advance education programs, and to offer affordable, quality, comprehensive health care to all Kentuckians. But finishing this fiscal year with a significant surplus better positions our next governor to build on our successes in energizing our economy and improving life for our families for generations to come. Thank you very much. Got questions?
What do you say to those in the campaign for government who say that the economy could be even better, job creation could be even better with right-to-work law?
Well, I would point to the fact that last year we were number 1 in the nation. It doesn't get much better than that. What it shows us is that we can create jobs without all of these artificial political issues. And that's what right to work is. That's what all of this other stuff is. They're artificial political issues that really don't have any impact on job creation. I mean, Indiana, Tennessee, right to work states around us. We were number 1. They weren't. So we know how to create jobs. We know how to bring industry and companies to Kentucky, and our job is to continue to do that.
Governor, how does this surplus have any impact at all on the pension outlook Kentucky faces, both in Kentucky retirement systems and Kentucky teachers' retirement systems, which have multi-billion-dollar unfunded liabilities waiting to be addressed by the 2016 legislature?
Certainly what this budget surplus indicates and helps to strengthen is the fact that our economy is now very aggressively growing. and we are creating jobs as well or better than any other state in the nation. So we've got the economy on the right track. That doesn't say that we've solved all of our budgetary issues. Obviously, we have pension issues in this state. But let me make this point about both of our pensions. Number one, on the Kentucky retirement system, our large pension that covers most state employees, we addressed those issues back a couple of years ago with a legislative session. We had the Pew Foundation come in, work with our legislature, work with our executive branch, work with our retirement system, and came up with a plan. And that plan included revising benefits. It included a commitment to fund the actuarially required contribution every year. And what Pew Foundation told us is that if you follow this plan, your retirement system will get back on solid ground. Now, it took over 20 years for that retirement system to get into the mess that it is in today. And it's going to take a number of years for us to get out of that mess. But we have a roadmap now that if we follow it, then that retirement system will be back on solid ground. Now, the teachers' retirement system, while not in as bad a shape as the big Kentucky retirement system, still is headed in the wrong direction. And it is time to come up with a plan, just as we have with the Kentucky retirement system, to address that unfunded liability. And it will be a similar kind of plan in that it will not solve this problem overnight. There's not enough money in anybody's budget to solve this problem overnight. But we didn't get into the situation overnight, and it's going to take years to build our way out of it. But we're going to come up with a plan, I'm confident that we will, that will, just like we did with the KRS, put the teachers' retirement system on the path that it needs to be on to get back on good, solid financial ground.
Do you have any estimate as to how much money, general funds particularly, that might take per fiscal year in the next budget to put KRS back on track?
Just as we did with the KRS, we've got a study group now, a task force that I created that has both executive branch and retirement people and legislative branch folks on it. And their goal is to come up with that plan and that process to have, going forward, a plan in place that will get the teachers' retirement system back on solid ground. And I'm confident that they'll do that because it has to be done.
Governor, another topic, some of the leadership in West Louisville say you have violated the law by.
Do we have any more questions on the budget?
I wanted to ask one more budget-related
Sure.
question, and that simply is, I forget what the actual revenue surplus was.
165.4 million.
And you've said the final surplus is about 82.
We're putting 82,
82.5.
82.5 into the budget reserve trust fund.
What was the rest of that revenue surplus needed to cover, or is that explained out on one of the handouts?
Let me have our budget director address that.
Be necessary government expense.
Okay, which were particularly, or at least in general, what were those
Those would be
NGEs?
typical, like the corrections amount that we would have based on the population during the year. That fire fighting suppression is another typical one.
And then all of the emergencies that,
Yes, disasters,
have.
federal disaster. Those would be typical of necessary government expense.
and
We do
that- and that amounted to,
Necessary government expense was 49.6 for
Okay.
15.
And the 82 is the final budget surplus number.
Yes.
The press release also talks about, or the handout, about the structural balance is now covered. So the revenue was sufficient to cover all the budgeted expenses without going into any one-time funds or one-time restricted monies?
yes.
And number two, this was fueled largely by the income tax and corporate tax, correct?
Well, most of our taxes showed growth. I think the severance tax obviously dropped, but all of the large taxes
Yes, sir.
categories grew.
But during the campaign season, a lot of the conversation on the campaign trail is, and from the other side of the aisle, tends to be tax reform is to lower income tax rates. Is this an argument against that? by any chance?
You know, I put out a tax reform package several months ago, and I think that is a good starting point for the legislature and the next governor to look at. But obviously, tax reform is different people have different ideas about what direction it ought to go. But ultimately, I do think that modernizing our tax system makes good sense and will even better position Kentucky for growth in the future if we go down that path.
Anybody else on this?
All right, as I mentioned before, some West Louisville leaders are concerned and say you didn't follow the law by not appointing any racial minorities to the U of L Board of Trustees. Your response to that?
Certainly, I'm proud of our track record when it comes to appointments and appointments based upon race and on gender. I think that we have a better record in that area than any administration in recent memory. And we continue to take all of that into consideration every time we make appointments. I was proud to be able to appoint Reverend Cosby on the U of L board. He served a full 6-year term. I was proud to appoint Paul Diaz, who is the first generation Cuban American and a minority on that board this time, and certainly future appointments. And I'm certainly hopeful that the next governor in future appointments will continue the process that we have put in place that tries to make sure that we take all of that into consideration with every appointment we make.
If I could follow up, why no African Americans this time?
We took all the applications in, and then we looked at the spaces we had, and I chose the folks that I felt were best qualified to serve on the board for the next 6 years.
Anybody else on anything else?
Let me ask you about Kevin Bratcher's call to allow National Guards people to carry arms at their facilities, regardless of whether they have a concealed carry permit. What about that?
Well, and let me give you a statement on that because we've had several inquiries. Obviously, the tragedy in Tennessee highlighted the need for heightened security at our National Guard facilities and at recruiting stations. And General Tonini, our Adjutant General, and I have had a number of conversations to make sure that we are doing right by those people that are serving to protect us. We want to give them as much protection as humanly possible while they do their jobs. Kentucky actually has been proactive in this area. And number one, our active Guard members, assuming that their commanding officer authorizes it, can already carry weapons. We also have a policy that was put in place back in 2013 that allows our Guard that are on active duty in any of our facilities or recruiting stations to carry concealed weapons and to go through the concealed carry process. And so we anticipated the possibility of these kinds of things happening, and we've addressed that, and General Tonini feels that we're in a good spot in terms of providing our active duty Guard with all of the security and all the protections right now that we can.
In those conversations with him, with General Tonini, any ideas for anything additional that you might consider doing to increase security in light of Chattanooga?
I instructed him to keep on top of the situation, and if he had any other ideas about what we should do in addition to what we're already doing, to certainly let us know, because we're both committed to providing the utmost safety to our personnel.
So the idea that Bratcher has of allowing those, even without concealed carry permits, to carry weapons on their installations, not a good idea in your mind?
Well, they already can, assuming that the commanding officer there, they already have the right to do that if they're on active duty at their facilities. They already have that right.
Anybody else?
Governor, I'd like to get your take on the call from some House Republicans to expand Kentucky's religious freedom law to cover the county clerks, and there's also not in the religious freedom law, but the provisions that protect the clergy in wake of the same-sex marriage ruling.
Well, certainly, once the Supreme Court decision came down, Kentucky complied with the law. And folks can now get married in Kentucky, and all marriages are recognized in Kentucky. We have revised our revenue guidelines and other guidelines to make them gender neutral and to comply with the law. As you know, there's a couple of clerks that don't feel that they can do their jobs in terms of issuing license because of their personal convictions. I understand fully their strong feelings on this, and I respect those feelings. But what I would say is when you voluntarily decide to run for an office and you win, then you raise your hand and you take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. That oath doesn't say I'll uphold those parts of the Constitution that I agree with and won't on the parts that I don't agree with. It requires all of us who take that oath to comply with the Constitution as the Supreme Court interprets it. When the Casey County clerk asked me for my advice on what to do, I said, I respect your feelings, but when you accepted this job and took that oath, it puts you on a different level. You have official duties now that the state law puts on you. And, you know, you can continue to have your own personal beliefs, but you're also taking an oath to fulfill the duties prescribed by law. And if you are at that point to where your personal convictions tell you that you simply cannot fulfill your duties that you were elected to do, then obviously an honorable course to take is to resign and let someone else step in who feels that they can fulfill those duties.
Did your personal convictions on same-sex marriage conflict with your actions in appealing that ruling?
Well, as you know, I have not allowed my personal feelings to become involved in this whole issue because I felt as governor we had people in this state who have very strong feelings on both sides of the issue. We have a constitutional amendment that was voted in by about 70% of the population. So I felt like I owed it to every Kentuckian to try to get a Supreme Court decision that one way or the other would settle this issue and say what the law was all across this land. We appealed those cases. The Supreme Court issued that opinion, and now Kentucky's abiding by that opinion. And I'm spending my time making sure that we implement the law, and you know, my personal feelings can wait till another day.
But you mentioned personal convictions with the county clerks going against what they feel like they should or not do in office. If you had, do you think that, or if you had these convictions on same-sex marriage, if you believe that it was right, is that what? I guess I'm trying to get at, is that an example of you taking your personal feelings out of a situation like you're calling on the county clerks to do?
Well, as I say, I've never discussed and don't think it's time for me to discuss my personal feelings on this issue. As governor, I feel like I need to implement the law. And as office holders, everybody in the state who takes that oath is now bound by that constitutional decision and, you know, need to comply with the law.
You going to Fancy Farm this year?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Anybody else? All right.
Okay, thank you all.